To our amazing viewers at Cheating Tales Lab, welcome and thank you. Your presence makes these stories worth sharing. We'd love to hear, which part of the world are you joining us from? Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect on Paper. David Morrison had built his life like he built houses, with precision, attention to detail, and an unwavering belief that solid foundations could weather any storm. At 38, he owned Morrison Construction, a mid-sized company that had earned a reputation for quality work and ethical business practices in their Colorado town of Pine Ridge. His calloused hands and sun-weathered face told the story of a man who'd worked his way up from swinging hammers to signing contracts. Claire Morrison, née Winters, had been the crown jewel of his achievements. When they'd married 10 years ago, she was fresh out of college with a marketing degree, blonde hair that caught sunlight like spun gold, and ambitions that seemed to align perfectly with his own. She'd helped him rebrand his small construction business into something respectable, designing logos and managing social media, with an efficiency that impressed even his most demanding clients. Their house on Maple Street was a testament to David's craftsmanship: custom cabinetry, hand-selected hardwood floors, and a kitchen island where they'd once planned their future over morning coffee. Claire had wanted children, and David had agreed, imagining little feet running through the halls he'd carefully measured and built. But years passed, and those conversations grew shorter, replaced by Claire's increasing involvement in her yoga studio downtown and David's longer hours managing increasingly complex projects. The first crack in their foundation appeared so subtly that David almost missed it. Claire began working late more frequently, her phone buzzing with texts she'd quickly silence when he walked into the room. She'd started wearing perfume to her Tuesday evening business development meetings and had joined a book club that seemed to require an unusual amount of weekend travel to nearby Denver. David wasn't naive, but he also wasn't the type to jump to conclusions without evidence. His business had taught him that assumptions could cost thousands of dollars in mistakes. So when Claire mentioned she'd be attending a marketing conference in Aspen for a long weekend, he simply kissed her goodbye and told her to drive safely. It was only when his friend Tommy Breslin, who worked ski patrol in Aspen, texted him a photo of Claire having an intimate dinner with a man David didn't recognize that the foundation began to show serious structural damage. The timestamp showed Friday night, but Claire had told him the conference didn't start until Saturday morning. David stared at the photo on his phone, sitting in his truck outside a job site where his crew was installing new windows on a family's dream home. The irony wasn't lost on him. He spent his days building dreams for others while his own crumbled in real time. The man in the photo was younger than David, probably early 30s, with the kind of refined features and expensive clothes that suggested money inherited rather than earned. That night, when Claire returned home with conference materials and stories about networking opportunities, David said nothing. He'd learned long ago that the best time to assess structural damage was when the building was under stress. He would wait, watch, and gather evidence before making any moves. The waiting became a different kind of torture. David found himself studying Claire's face across the dinner table, searching for signs of deception in expressions he'd once found beautiful. Her laugh, which used to fill their house with warmth, now sounded hollow and performative. When she reached for his hand during their evening walks, her touch felt foreign, contaminated by secrets he wasn't supposed to know. 3 weeks after the Aspen photo, Claire announced she'd been offered a part-time consulting position with a marketing firm in Denver. The position would require her to travel frequently and work irregular hours, but the money was excellent, and it would give her the career advancement she'd been craving. "It's exactly what I've been working toward," she said, her eyes bright with an enthusiasm David hadn't seen in months. Ryan Kellerman, the senior partner, saw my work with the yoga studio and was impressed. "This could be the start of something really significant for me." Ryan Kellerman. David filed the name away carefully, adding it to the growing collection of evidence he was building in his mind. He congratulated Claire, told her he was proud of her ambition, and began planning his own next moves. Chapter 2. The Other Man. David's investigation into Ryan Kellerman revealed a man who collected beautiful things the way some people collected stamps. At 34, Ryan had inherited his late father's boutique marketing firm, Kellerman and Associates, along with a trust fund that allowed him to live in a downtown Denver penthouse and drive cars that cost more than most people's houses. Through social media and professional networks, David learned that Ryan specialized in lifestyle brands and had a particular talent for working with small business owners, usually attractive women who needed guidance scaling their vision. His client list read like a roster of potential victims: yoga studio owners, boutique shop proprietors, artisanal food producers, and wellness coaches. What David found most revealing was Ryan's pattern. Through careful examination of archived social media posts and local business publications, he discovered that Ryan's consulting relationships typically lasted between 6 months to 2 years, always ending when the women either sold their businesses or when their personal relationships imploded. The man was a professional homewrecker, using his inherited wealth and business acumen to prey on women seeking professional validation. Claire fit the pattern perfectly. She was married to a blue-collar man who, despite his success, would always be seen as beneath Ryan's social class. She ran a small business that could benefit from marketing expertise. Most importantly, she had the kind of restless ambition that Ryan could exploit by offering her glimpses of a life she'd never be able to afford on David's income alone. David began his own surveillance carefully. He purchased a small, discreet camera system and had Tommy help him track Claire's movements during her supposed work trips. What he discovered was a methodical affair being conducted in expensive hotels, upscale restaurants, and Ryan's penthouse apartment. Claire wasn't just cheating. She was auditioning for a different life entirely. The evidence mounted week by week. Photos of Claire's car parked outside Ryan's building overnight. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants David had never heard of. Text message fragments he could glimpse when Claire left her phone unattended, filled with inside jokes and intimacies that had once belonged to their marriage. But David's anger was evolving into something colder and more focused. Each piece of evidence didn't just reveal Claire's betrayal. It showed him the calculated nature of Ryan's predatory behavior. This wasn't a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a systematic destruction of David's life for another man's entertainment. The breaking point came when David discovered that Claire had been taking photos inside their house and sharing them with Ryan. Not explicit photos, but carefully curated shots of their home's custom details. The kitchen David had designed, the bedroom furniture he'd built by hand, the garden they'd planned together. She was literally selling their private life to impress her lover, turning their sacred spaces into performance art for Ryan's amusement. That night, David sat in his workshop behind the house, surrounded by tools he'd collected over 2 decades of building things meant to last. His hands, usually steady enough to measure cuts to the 16th of an inch, trembled with rage as he thought about Ryan's manicured fingers touching his wife's skin in rooms bought with money the man had never worked to earn. David had always believed in justice through proper channels: courts, lawyers, civilized resolution of disputes. But as he sat there, he realized that the legal system was designed to handle crimes against property and person, not the systematic destruction of a man's life through legal manipulation and emotional warfare. If Claire and Ryan wanted to play games with his life, David would teach them what it meant to compete against someone who understood that some foundations, once cracked, could never be repaired, only demolished and replaced with something stronger. Chapter 3: Thanksgiving Revelations. The Winters family Thanksgiving had always been a command performance. Claire's parents, Robert and Patricia Winters, hosted the annual gathering in their sprawling suburban home, complete with formal dining room, crystal stemware, and enough family politics to fuel a minor war. David had endured 9 previous Thanksgivings, gradually learning to navigate the subtle class warfare that simmered beneath the surface of polite conversation. This year felt different from the moment they arrived. Claire's demeanor shifted as soon as they pulled into her parents' driveway, her posture straightening and her voice taking on the refined tone she'd cultivated in college. She treated David less like a husband and more like an obligation she was required to bring along. The guest list included the usual suspects: Claire's older brother Michael and his wife Jennifer, along with their twin teenage daughters, her younger sister Amy with her husband Scott and their toddler son, and Claire's cousin Rachel with her husband Greg, a financial advisor who'd recently inherited his own practice. David noticed immediately that the conversation flowed around him rather than including him. When Michael asked about his construction business, Claire answered for him, emphasizing how David was keeping busy with local projects while she discussed her exciting new consulting work. When Patricia inquired about their travel plans, Claire mentioned her business trips but framed David's absence as him holding down the fort rather than acknowledging they were living increasingly separate lives. The afternoon progressed with David feeling like a bit player in his own marriage's public performance. Claire laughed at jokes that weren't funny, engaged in conversations about people he'd never met, and consistently positioned herself physically closer to other family members than to him. It was as if she was practicing being single while still technically married. The defining moment came during dinner preparation. David had offered to help in the kitchen, partly out of genuine desire to be useful and partly to escape the living room conversations about real estate investments and vacation properties that highlighted his blue-collar status. He was carving the turkey when he overheard Claire's voice from the adjacent dining room, where she was setting the table with Rachel. "Honestly, Ratch, sometimes I feel like I'm basically single anyway," Claire was saying, her voice carrying the casual cruelty that comes with perceived privacy. "David's sweet, but he's so limited. He helps with the bills and maintains the house, but there's no intellectual stimulation, no real partnership in building something bigger." David's hand tightened on the carving knife as Rachel responded, "But he seems devoted to you. Isn't that worth something?" Claire's laugh was light and dismissive. "Devoted like a dog is devoted. It's not the same thing as being with someone who challenges you, who opens doors to new possibilities. I've been working with this marketing consultant in Denver, Ryan, and the difference in our conversations is like night and day. When I'm with him, I remember what it feels like to be intellectually alive." "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Rachel's voice dropped to a whisper, but David's enhanced alertness caught every word. "I'm saying I'm exploring my options," Claire replied. "David's a good man, but good isn't enough anymore. I deserve more than just stability." David set down the carving knife with deliberate precision. His hands were steady now, his mind crystalline clear. Claire had just publicly categorized him as a utility rather than a husband, dismissed their decade of marriage as mere convenience, and admitted to emotional, at minimum, infidelity with Ryan. But more than that, she'd revealed her fundamental character. This wasn't a woman struggling with an unhappy marriage. This was someone who had been psychologically preparing to discard him while maintaining the financial and social benefits of their relationship. She was auditing for her next life while keeping him as a safety net. David pulled his phone from his pocket and scrolled through his contacts until he found Tommy Breslin's number. His friend answered on the second ring. "Tommy, it's Dave. I need you to make some calls for me. Remember those photos you took in Aspen? I need you to send them to everyone in my contact list, family, friends, business associates, everyone. Also, I need you to call your cousin Jake at the newspaper and tell him I have a story about predatory business practices he might find interesting." "Jesus, Dave, are you sure about this? Once this gets out, there's no taking it back." David looked through the kitchen doorway at his wife, who was continuing her conversation with Rachel, completely unaware that her husband's world had just shifted on its axis. She was gesturing animatedly, probably describing more details about her exciting new life possibilities. "Tommy, for 10 years I've been the foundation holding up someone else's dreams. I'm done being structural support for people who see me as disposable. Send everything. Tonight." "You got it, buddy. And Dave, for what it's worth, you deserve better than this." David ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket. He returned to carving the turkey, working with the same methodical precision he brought to all his projects. By the time he'd finished arranging the meat on the serving platter, Claire's phone had begun buzzing with notifications. He watched through the doorway as she pulled the device from her purse, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and then pale horror as she scrolled through messages. Her hand went to her throat, a gesture he'd seen her make during moments of extreme stress, and her eyes darted around the room as if looking for an escape route. When she looked toward the kitchen and saw David watching her, their eyes met across the space. He didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge her distress in any way. He simply held her gaze with the steady, measuring look he gave to buildings he was about to tear down. Claire's phone continued buzzing. Across the dining room, other family members' phones were beginning to chime with notifications. David picked up the turkey platter and walked into the dining room to announce that dinner was ready. The reckoning had begun. Chapter 4: Structural Damage Assessment. The ride home from Thanksgiving dinner passed in complete silence. Claire stared out the passenger window, her phone clutched in her lap like a ticking bomb, while David drove with the calm focus of a man who had finally stopped pretending his life wasn't falling apart. The notifications had continued throughout dinner, creating an undercurrent of tension that had infected the entire Winters family gathering. By the time they pulled into their driveway, David had received confirmation texts from Tommy indicating that the photos and Ryan's contact information had been distributed to David's entire network, including his business associates, Claire's yoga studio clients, and members of both their extended families. The small-town gossip network that Claire had always disdained was about to become her judge and jury. Inside their house, Claire finally spoke. "David, we need to talk about what happened tonight." "No," David replied, heading directly to their bedroom. "We need to talk about what's been happening for months. You're welcome to start whenever you're ready to tell the truth." David began packing methodically, folding clothes with the same precision he used for measuring lumber. Claire watched from the doorway, her face cycling through expressions of panic, anger, and calculation. "You can't just leave," she said. "This is our house, our life, whatever you think you know. I know Ryan Kellerman drives a silver BMW and lives in the Meridian Tower downtown." David interrupted without looking up from his suitcase. "I know you've spent at least 12 nights there in the past 2 months. I know you've been taking photos of our house to share with him. I know you think I'm intellectually inferior and that you're exploring your options while using me as a safety net." Claire's face went white. "You were listening to a private conversation. You were having a private conversation about our marriage in your parents' dining room." David closed the suitcase and turned to face her. "Claire, for 10 years I've built everything around making you happy. I designed this house for you. I built my business partly to give you the life you said you wanted. I've been the foundation holding up your dreams, and now I find out you think of me as hired help. That's not. I was just frustrated, and Rachel was pushing me to." "Don't." David's voice carried a finality that stopped Claire mid-sentence. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending this was a momentary lapse. You've been conducting a systematic affair with a man who makes a living destroying marriages. You've been lying to me for months while I've been working to support the life that was giving you the freedom to betray me." David picked up his suitcase and walked past Claire toward the bedroom door. She grabbed his arm, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely, revealing the desperation underneath. "David, please. We can work through this. People make mistakes. We can go to counseling. We can." "Claire." David's voice was gentle but immovable. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. Actually, you made dozens of choices over several months. And tonight, you chose to publicly humiliate me and our marriage. Now I'm making a choice. If you leave, if you do this, there's no coming back. Is that really what you want?" David looked at his wife, really looked at her, for what he realized would be the last time as her husband. She was still beautiful, still the woman he'd fallen in love with a decade ago. But beauty without loyalty was just attractive packaging around something rotten. "Claire, coming back implies I'd be returning to something that was real in the first place. What I discovered tonight is that I've been married to a performance, not a person. So no, I don't want to come back to that." David drove to Tommy's house, where his friend had prepared the guest room and a bottle of whiskey. They sat on Tommy's back porch, looking out at the mountains that surrounded Pine Ridge, while David's phone continued buzzing with calls and texts from family, friends, and business associates who'd received the photos. "So what's the plan now?" Tommy asked, refilling David's glass. "First, I'm going to make sure Ryan Kellerman understands that there are consequences for targeting other men's wives. Then I'm going to ensure that Claire learns what it actually costs to rebuild a life after you've demolished it. Dave, I've known you for 15 years, and I've never seen you like this. Just be careful you don't do something you can't come back from." David drank his whiskey and considered Tommy's warning. For a decade, he'd been careful, responsible, and measured in everything he did. He'd built a reputation as a man whose word was his bond, whose work was guaranteed, whose character was unquestionable. But what good was an unquestionable character when people felt free to question it anyway? What value was reliability when reliable meant disposable? What benefit was playing by rules when your opponents felt free to make up their own? "Tommy, I appreciate the concern, but I'm not planning to do anything illegal or violent. I'm just going to stop pretending that other people's comfort is more important than my own justice." Over the next 3 days, David methodically dismantled the life he'd built with Claire. He transferred his half of their joint savings to a new account, formally separated their finances, and had his lawyer draft divorce papers that would force the sale of their house. Since David had built the house himself and held the construction liens, he was in a position to ensure that any sale would heavily favor his financial position. But the real work was more psychological than financial. David began reaching out to other men in Ryan's orbit, the husbands and boyfriends of Ryan's previous consulting clients. What he discovered was a network of men who'd all experienced variations of the same systematic destruction of their relationships. Chapter 5. Building the Coalition. David's investigation into Ryan Kellerman's history revealed a pattern so consistent it resembled a business model. Over the past 6 years, Ryan had targeted at least 8 women who owned small businesses, offering marketing consultation that inevitably led to emotional and physical affairs. In each case, the woman's existing relationship ended within 6 to 18 months, often leaving the man financially and emotionally devastated while Ryan moved on to his next target. David's first ally was Marcus Webb, whose wife had divorced him 2 years earlier after a consulting relationship with Ryan ended their 15-year marriage. Marcus had lost his house, his business partnership, and custody of his 2 children when his ex-wife decided to pursue her authentic self in Denver's wellness community. "The bastard has a system," Marcus explained over coffee at a diner outside town. "He targets women who are smart but undervalued in their relationships. He offers them intellectual stimulation, professional advancement, and access to a lifestyle they couldn't afford otherwise. By the time they realize he's not offering them a future, just temporary access to his world, they've already blown up their real lives." The second ally was Travis Reed, whose fiancée had broken their engagement after becoming professionally involved with Ryan's marketing firm. Travis had discovered that Ryan's standard practice was to create dependency by offering business opportunities that required the women to travel frequently, attend expensive networking events, and gradually separate from their support systems. "It's psychological warfare," Travis said. "He makes them feel like their current lives are small and limiting, then provides a taste of something bigger. But he never commits to anything permanent. Once they've destroyed their existing relationships for him, he lets them figure out that he was never going to leave his bachelor lifestyle for them." The third member of David's informal coalition was Dr. Alan Foster, whose wife had left their 22-year marriage after Ryan convinced her to franchise her therapy practice. Alan had lost his house, his retirement savings, and his relationship with his teenage daughter when his ex-wife chose to start over in Denver rather than repair their stagnant marriage. "The cruelest part," Alan explained, "is that he makes them believe they're choosing empowerment over limitation. They think they're growing as people when they're actually just being manipulated by someone who understands their vulnerabilities better than they do." David realized that Ryan's true skill wasn't marketing, it was psychological profiling. He identified women who felt underappreciated or intellectually unfulfilled in their current relationships, then provided just enough validation and opportunity to make their existing lives feel inadequate by comparison. But Ryan had made a crucial mistake with Claire. He'd underestimated David's capacity for strategic thinking and his access to resources. Unlike Ryan's previous target's partners, David owned his own business, had extensive local connections, and possessed the kind of practical skills that could be weaponized with devastating effectiveness. David's plan began to take shape during a series of meetings with Marcus, Travis, and Alan. They would target Ryan's business and social connections systematically, using their combined knowledge of his patterns and their local influence to create consequences that extended far beyond mere embarrassment. Marcus, who worked in commercial real estate, had access to information about Ryan's business leases and property investments. Travis, a former journalist, had contacts in Denver's media community who might be interested in a story about predatory business practices. Alan, despite his divorce, maintained relationships with other mental health professionals who could speak to the psychological manipulation involved in Ryan's system. "We're not just going after him for what he did to us," David explained to the group. "We're going after him for what he's going to do to the next guy, and the guy after that. This isn't revenge, it's pest control." David's first move was to have Marcus arrange a meeting with Ryan under the pretense of discussing a potential real estate investment opportunity. The goal was to confirm Ryan's current business situation and identify vulnerabilities that could be exploited legally and effectively. The meeting was scheduled for the following week at Ryan's office. David would attend as Marcus's construction consultant, giving him an opportunity to assess Ryan's operation firsthand and gather intelligence for the larger campaign. But David had also made a decision that his allies didn't know about yet. Ryan Kellerman wasn't going to be his only target. Claire had made her choice, and now she was going to learn what it truly cost to discard a man who'd spent his life building things meant to last, including his capacity for strategic, patient, and utterly ruthless justice. Chapter 6. The trap begins to close. Ryan Kellerman's office occupied the entire 15th floor of a downtown Denver high-rise, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains and furnishings that screamed expensive minimalism. David had dressed the part of a successful contractor for the meeting: clean jeans, pressed shirt, and boots that looked professional rather than work-worn. Ryan greeted Marcus and David with the kind of confident handshake that came from a lifetime of knowing that money could buy access to almost anything. He was exactly what David had expected: tall, lean, with features that belonged in a magazine advertisement for luxury watches or European cars. His smile was practiced, his eye contact calculated, and his entire demeanor radiated the casual arrogance of inherited privilege. "Marcus tells me you're looking at expanding into commercial development," Ryan said, settling behind a desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. "I've got some interesting opportunities that might align with your skill set." David played his role perfectly, asking the right questions about potential projects while mentally cataloging everything he observed. Ryan's office was designed to impress. Leather-bound books he'd probably never read, expensive art that looked like it had been selected by a decorator, and photographs of himself with various local celebrities and politicians. But what interested David most was what he didn't see: any evidence of actual work being done. The desk was too clean, the computer too perfectly positioned, the entire space too staged. This wasn't a working office. It was a performance space designed to create an impression of success and sophistication. During their conversation, Ryan mentioned his marketing work almost casually, as if it were a side interest rather than his primary business. He spoke about helping small business owners realize their potential and creating growth strategies for emerging brands. The language was carefully neutral, designed to sound professional while revealing nothing specific about his methods or client base. When Marcus asked about specific success stories, Ryan's answers became vague and self-congratulatory. He spoke about transformative relationships with female entrepreneurs and helping women break through limiting mindsets about their potential. To someone who didn't know better, it would sound like legitimate business consulting. To David, it sounded like a predator describing his hunting strategy. The meeting concluded with Ryan offering to send Marcus some materials about potential investment opportunities. As they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Marcus turned to David with a grim expression. "That wasn't a business meeting," Marcus said. "That was a performance. The guy's running some kind of elaborate con game, and his office is just a prop in the show." David had reached the same conclusion, but he'd also noticed something else. Ryan was completely comfortable operating in the open because he believed himself untouchable. His confidence wasn't just based on inherited wealth. It came from the assumption that his victims would be too embarrassed or emotionally devastated to fight back effectively. That evening, David called an emergency meeting of his coalition. They gathered at Travis's house, where they could speak freely without risking being overheard. David shared his observations from the office visit, and the group began refining their strategy. "He's not just targeting our women," David explained. "He's targeting our entire community. Every marriage he destroys weakens the social fabric of our town. Every business he manipulates through false promises affects our local economy. This isn't just personal, it's an attack on our way of life." Alan had spent the week researching Ryan's family background and discovered that Ryan's trust fund was structured in a way that required him to maintain certain appearances of professional success. If his business reputation were severely damaged, he could potentially lose access to significant portions of his inheritance. Travis had reached out to his media contacts and found that several Denver journalists were already aware of rumors about Ryan's consulting methods but had been unable to develop sufficient evidence for a story. However, if multiple victims came forward simultaneously with documented evidence, that could change. Marcus had discovered that Ryan's office lease was coming up for renewal, and his building's management company was already concerned about complaints they'd received regarding inappropriate conduct in the building. A coordinated campaign of legitimate grievances could potentially result in Ryan losing his impressive business address. But David's most significant discovery was personal. Through his investigation, he learned that Claire wasn't just having an affair with Ryan. She was actively helping him target other women in Pine Ridge. She'd been sharing information about her yoga studio clients, identifying potential targets for Ryan's attention, and facilitating introductions under the guise of networking opportunities. Claire wasn't just unfaithful. She was complicit in Ryan's systematic predation. She'd become a recruiter for his operation, trading information about vulnerable women for access to his lifestyle and promises of business advancement. This revelation transformed David's understanding of what had happened to his marriage. Claire hadn't fallen victim to Ryan's manipulation. She'd become his partner in targeting other victims. She'd chosen to participate in the destruction of other families for her own benefit. The coalition's plan crystallized around this discovery. They would expose not just Ryan's individual actions, but the entire network he'd created, including Claire's role as his local coordinator. The goal wasn't just to stop him from targeting future victims. It was to ensure that everyone who'd participated in or enabled his operation faced consequences proportional to their choices. David's phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "We need to talk. This has gone far enough. People are calling the studio asking questions. Please call me." David showed the message to his allies, who all agreed it was likely an attempt to negotiate or manipulate him into backing down. They decided to ignore it and proceed with their plan. "Tomorrow, we start making calls," David announced. "By the end of the week, everyone in Pine Ridge is going to know exactly what Ryan Kellerman and his local associates have been doing to our community." "And after that?" Travis asked. David's smile was the kind that contractors wore when they were about to demolish a structure that had been condemned beyond repair. "After that, we see how well they handle living in the kind of ruins they've been leaving behind for other people." Chapter 7. The campaign begins. Monday morning brought the first phase of what David privately thought of as Project Foundation, the systematic demolition of Ryan Kellerman's operation and everyone who'd enabled it. The coalition had divided responsibilities based on their individual strengths and connections, creating a coordinated assault that would be impossible to defend against or dismiss as the actions of one angry husband. Travis led the media campaign, reaching out to his contacts at Denver newspapers, local television stations, and regional magazines. His pitch was simple and compelling. A story about predatory business practices targeting small-town women, complete with documented evidence and multiple victims willing to go on record. By noon, 3 journalists had expressed serious interest in investigating Ryan's consulting business. Marcus focused on the business community, using his real estate connections to quietly inform other professionals about Ryan's methods. His approach was more subtle, casual mentions during client meetings, strategic questions during networking events, and carefully placed comments that encouraged people to ask their own questions about Ryan's reputation. Allen took responsibility for the therapeutic community, reaching out to other mental health professionals in the region to discuss the psychological manipulation involved in Ryan's system. His clinical perspective gave weight to their allegations and helped frame Ryan's behavior as a form of systematic emotional abuse rather than mere infidelity. David coordinated the overall campaign while focusing on his own target, Claire. She'd sent him 6 increasingly desperate text messages since Sunday, each one revealing more about her growing panic as questions about her involvement began circulating through Pine Ridge's tight-knit community. The yoga studio had received calls from concerned clients asking about Claire's business relationship with that marketing consultant from Denver. Several women had canceled their memberships after learning that Claire had been sharing information about studio clients with Ryan. The local newspaper had left voicemails asking for comments about allegations of inappropriate business practices. By Tuesday evening, Claire was ready to talk. She called David from her car. Parked outside the yoga studio, she was no longer certain she could afford to keep open. "David, please. This is destroying everything I've worked for. People are saying terrible things about me, and none of it is true. I never meant for anyone to get hurt." "Claire, what specifically isn't true?" David asked, his voice calm and clinical. That you've been having an affair with Ryan Kellerman? That you've been sharing client information with him? That you helped him identify potential targets in our community? It wasn't like that. You don't understand what it's like to feel trapped in a life that's too small for who you want to become. Ryan offered me opportunities to grow, to become more than just a small-town housewife running a yoga studio. So you decided to help him destroy other people's marriages? I never intended for that to happen. I thought I was just networking, making connections. I didn't know what he was really doing until it was too late to stop. David felt a familiar anger rising, but he kept his voice level. Claire, you knew exactly what you were doing. You were trading information about vulnerable women for access to Ryan's lifestyle. You were recruiting victims for him while lying to me about your own involvement. That's not. Claire, stop lying. Even now, when your entire life is falling apart because of choices you made, you're still trying to manipulate the situation. You're not a victim here. You're a collaborator who got caught. The line went quiet for several seconds before Claire spoke again, her voice smaller and more desperate than David had ever heard it. What do you want from me? What will it take for you to stop this? I don't want anything from you, Claire. This isn't a negotiation. These are consequences. You participated in systematically destroying other people's lives, and now you get to experience what that feels like. David, I know you're angry, but this is beyond angry. This is cruel. You're ruining my life over a mistake. No, Claire, I'm not ruining your life. I'm revealing what you've already done to it. The life you think I'm destroying was never real anyway. It was just a performance you were giving while you planned to discard me for something better. Wednesday brought escalation. The first television story aired during the evening news, featuring interviews with Marcus and Travis about predatory marketing practices targeting rural women. While the story was careful to avoid naming specific individuals, it provided enough detail for local viewers to draw their own conclusions. Claire's yoga studio received a visit from a reporter asking about her business relationship with Denver marketing firms. 3 more clients canceled their memberships, and 2 of her instructors asked about finding alternative employment. Ryan, meanwhile, discovered that his office building's management company had received multiple complaints about inappropriate conduct and was reviewing his lease agreement. His assistant informed him that several clients had called to ask questions about his business practices, and 2 had canceled scheduled appointments. But David's most satisfying development came through an unexpected source. Ryan's ex-clients began contacting each other. The network of women who'd been targeted by his operation started comparing notes, sharing stories, and recognizing patterns they'd missed when they were isolated and manipulated. Dr. Sarah Kim, whose marriage had ended after a consulting relationship with Ryan, reached out to Marcus's ex-wife. Together, they contacted Travis's former fiancée and 2 other women who'd been caught in Ryan's web. What emerged was a picture of systematic psychological manipulation that went far beyond simple infidelity. He studied us, Dr. Kim explained during a conference call with the coalition. He learned our vulnerabilities, our dreams, our frustrations with our current lives. Then he crafted personalized fantasies that made our real relationships seem inadequate by comparison. The women's testimonies revealed the true scope of Ryan's operation. He maintained detailed files on his targets, tracking their emotional states, relationship satisfaction, and financial situations. He timed his approaches carefully, striking when women were most vulnerable to his offers of professional advancement and personal validation. But they also revealed Claire's role in the operation. She hadn't just been another victim. She'd been Ryan's primary source of intelligence about Pine Ridge's female business owners. She'd identified women who were struggling financially, experiencing marital problems, or feeling unfulfilled in their careers. She'd then arranged accidental meetings, social events, and networking opportunities that gave Ryan access to his targets. By Thursday, the story had acquired its own momentum. Local social media was buzzing with speculation and first-hand accounts. The regional newspaper announced it was preparing a comprehensive investigation into consulting fraud targeting rural communities. 2 law firms had contacted victims about potential civil litigation. Claire made one final attempt to negotiate, showing up at Tommy's house Thursday evening while David was reviewing construction plans for his next project. David, please. I'll do anything. I'll leave town. I'll give you everything in the divorce. I'll disappear completely. Just please make this stop. David looked up from his blueprints and studied his wife's face. She was still beautiful, but the confidence and vitality that had first attracted him were gone, replaced by the hollow desperation of someone who'd finally run out of lies to tell. Claire, there's nothing to stop. This isn't something I'm doing to you anymore. This is just what happens when the truth comes out about what you've been doing to other people. But you could tell people to stop asking questions. You could say you've forgiven me, that we're working things out. Why would I do that? Because you love me. Because we had 10 good years together. Because everyone deserves a second chance. David carefully rolled up his blueprints and looked at Claire with the same expression he wore when examining buildings that were too damaged to repair. Claire, 10 years ago, I would have moved mountains to protect you from consequences like this. But that was when I thought you were the kind of person who deserved protection. Now I know you're the kind of person other people need protection from. So this is it. You're just going to destroy me and walk away. No, Claire. I'm going to finish what I started and build something better. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone can see the damage clearly. Chapter 8. The Reckoning Accelerates. Friday morning brought news that changed everything. Ryan Kellerman had been arrested for fraud. Not the kind of relationship fraud David's coalition had been exposing, but actual financial fraud related to his marketing business. The investigation, triggered by the media attention surrounding his personal conduct, had uncovered a pattern of billing clients for services never rendered and misappropriating funds designated for advertising campaigns. Travis called David with the news at 6 a.m. Turns out our boy Ryan wasn't just stealing wives. He was stealing money too. The district attorney's office got interested when the TV story aired, and they've been looking into his business practices. Apparently, he's been running a pretty sophisticated billing scam for years. David felt a moment of satisfaction followed immediately by strategic concern. If Ryan was facing serious criminal charges, it might overshadow their efforts to expose his systematic targeting of married women. They needed to ensure that his predatory relationship patterns remained part of the public narrative. But the fraud charges created an unexpected opportunity. With Ryan facing potential prison time, his victims would have more credibility and legal protection when coming forward with their own stories. The narrative was shifting from angry husbands making accusations to pattern of predatory behavior by accused criminal. Claire's situation deteriorated rapidly. By Friday afternoon, her yoga studio had lost half its membership. Her landlord, citing concerns about the business's viability and negative community sentiment, had given her notice that her lease would not be renewed. 3 of her 5 instructors had found positions at other studios in the region. But David's investigation had uncovered something else. Claire's financial situation was far worse than she'd admitted. She'd been using the studio's business accounts to fund her lifestyle upgrades, including expensive dinners, hotel stays, and shopping trips during her consulting meetings with Ryan. The business was essentially bankrupt, surviving only because David's income had been subsidizing both their household expenses and Claire's unreported business losses. Saturday brought the weekend edition of the regional newspaper, featuring a front-page investigation titled Marketing Consultant Accused of Targeting Rural Wives. The story, bylined by one of Travis's former colleagues, provided a comprehensive examination of Ryan's methods and included interviews with 6 victims and their former partners. Claire was mentioned by name as a local business owner who allegedly assisted in identifying potential targets for the accused consultant. The article carefully avoided making accusations that couldn't be substantiated, but it provided enough detail for readers to understand her role in Ryan's operation. David's phone rang constantly throughout the weekend, friends offering support, business associates asking questions, family members trying to understand what had happened to his marriage. He answered each call patiently, explaining the situation without emotional dramatics and emphasizing that his primary concern was protecting other families from similar manipulation. But the most significant call came Sunday evening from an unexpected source, Claire's father, Robert Winters. "David, I owe you an apology," Robert said without preamble. "Patricia and I have been reading about this situation, and we're horrified by what Claire has been doing. We had no idea she was involved in anything like this. Mr. Winters, I appreciate the call, but..." "No, let me finish. We've known for months that Claire was unhappy in your marriage, but we assumed it was just typical marital problems that could be worked through with time and effort. We never imagined she was actively participating in hurting other families." Robert's voice carried a weight that David had never heard before. Patricia and I have been married for 37 years, and we've always prided ourselves on raising children with strong moral character. To learn that Claire has been, what's the word the newspaper used, recruiting victims for this man? It's devastating. I understand this must be difficult for your family. David, we want you to know that Patricia and I don't expect you to forgive Claire or to take her back. What she's done is unforgivable. We also want you to know that we're not going to enable her behavior by providing financial support or helping her avoid consequences. This was unexpected. David had assumed that Claire's parents would rally around their daughter and pressure him to reconcile for the sake of family harmony. We've decided to cut off Claire's access to her trust fund, Robert continued. The money was meant to support a family and a stable life, not to subsidize the destruction of other people's families. We're also removing her as a beneficiary of our estate until she demonstrates genuine remorse and makes meaningful efforts to repair the damage she's caused. David was quiet for a moment, processing this development. Claire's trust fund wasn't enormous, but it had provided her with a financial cushion that made her feel secure enough to take risks with her marriage and business. Without it, she would face the full economic consequences of her choices. Mr. Winters, I'm not sure what to say. Say that you'll be happy, David. Say that you'll build a life you deserve with someone who appreciates what you have to offer. Claire made her choice, and now she has to live with it. But that doesn't mean you have to live with it too. Monday brought the final piece of David's campaign, the release of a comprehensive report prepared by Alan, documenting the psychological manipulation techniques used by predatory consultants like Ryan. The report, distributed to local media and social service organizations, provided a framework for understanding how intelligent, capable women could be systematically targeted and manipulated into destroying their own lives. The report included case studies, with names changed, of Ryan's victims, analysis of his methods, and recommendations for protecting vulnerable individuals from similar predation. It was academic rather than accusatory, but it effectively dismantled any remaining sympathy for Ryan's operation or his collaborators. Claire made one final attempt to contact David, sending a handwritten letter to Tommy's house. In it, she acknowledged her mistakes, apologized for her role in Ryan's operation, and begged for a chance to make amends. She admitted that she'd been swept up in a fantasy and had lost sight of her values and responsibilities. David read the letter twice, then handed it to Tommy without comment. "You're not even going to respond?" Tommy asked. "What would be the point? She's apologizing because she got caught and because she's facing consequences. If I hadn't discovered what she was doing, she'd still be doing it. An apology that only comes after exposure isn't really an apology. It's just another manipulation." Tuesday's newspaper brought the conclusion David had been waiting for. Ryan Kellerman had been formally charged with fraud and conspiracy, and his business assets had been frozen pending investigation. His office lease had been terminated, his access to his trust fund had been suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, and several of his victims had filed civil lawsuits seeking damages. But more importantly for David's sense of justice, Ryan's social circle had completely abandoned him. The wealthy Denver set that had enabled and celebrated his lifestyle had no tolerance for criminal charges and public scandal. He'd been dropped from club memberships, disinvited from social events, and effectively exiled from the community that had provided him with victims and validation. Claire's situation had reached its own conclusion. The yoga studio had closed permanently. She'd been forced to move out of their house and into a small apartment, and her applications for employment at other fitness facilities had been rejected due to her association with the scandal. But David felt no satisfaction in her suffering. Satisfaction would have implied that he'd needed Claire to fail in order for him to succeed. Instead, he felt the quiet contentment that came from completing a difficult project according to specifications and on schedule. Chapter 9. Building Something Better. 6 months after the Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything, David stood in the morning sunlight filtering through the windows of his new house. It was smaller than the home he'd shared with Claire, but every detail reflected his own preferences rather than compromises made for someone else's vision. The house sat on 10 acres outside Pine Ridge, with mountain views and enough space for the workshop he'd always wanted to build. He'd designed it as a single man's retreat: clean lines, functional spaces, and built-in storage for the tools and projects that brought him genuine satisfaction. Ryan Kellerman had been sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud, and conspiracy. The judge had specifically noted the predatory nature of his crimes and their impact on multiple communities. His assets had been liquidated to pay restitution to his victims, leaving him facing bankruptcy and complete social exile upon his eventual release. Claire had moved to Phoenix, where she'd found work as a receptionist at a dental office. Her Instagram account, once filled with carefully curated photos of her ideal life, had been deleted months ago. David occasionally received updates about her through mutual acquaintances, but he felt no curiosity about her circumstances or future plans. The divorce had been finalized with terms that reflected Claire's financial misconduct and her role in Ryan's operation. David had retained ownership of their house, which he'd sold to a young family who appreciated the custom craftsmanship. Claire had received minimal assets and no ongoing support, as her adultery and business fraud had voided most of the protections typically afforded to spouses in divorce proceedings. But David's sense of completion came from something more significant than legal victory or financial settlement. It came from the knowledge that he'd protected his community from predators who had viewed their relationships as opportunities for exploitation. Marcus had remarried, a widow named Linda who ran a successful bakery and appreciated both his loyalty and his hard-earned wisdom about the difference between love and manipulation. Travis had started dating Dr. Sarah Kim, one of Ryan's former victims, and their relationship was built on mutual understanding of the importance of genuine partnership. Alan had reconciled with his daughter, who had gained perspective on her mother's choices as she'd matured and learned more about what had really happened to their family. He'd started a support group for men whose families had been destroyed by predatory individuals, and the group had helped several dozen people process their experiences and rebuild their lives. David's own life had acquired a rhythm that felt sustainable rather than performative. He'd expanded Morrison Construction to include a specialty division for custom homes, and his reputation for quality work had attracted clients from throughout the region. He'd joined the town planning committee and was working on initiatives to support local small businesses and protect the community from outside exploitation. He'd also started dating Jennifer Park, a veterinarian who had moved to Pine Ridge to take over the retiring local vet's practice. Jennifer was Korean American, had served 2 tours as a military veterinarian, and possessed the kind of quiet strength that came from competence rather than drama. Their relationship was developing slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than dramatic passion or calculated dependency. "You know what I appreciate about you?" Jennifer had told him during a recent dinner at her small house near the animal clinic. "You're exactly who you appear to be. There's no hidden agenda, no performance, no attempt to be someone you're not to impress me." David had considered this observation carefully before responding. "I spent 10 years trying to be whatever someone else needed me to be, and it almost destroyed me. I'm not interested in performing for anyone anymore." "Good," Jennifer had replied. "I've spent enough time in war zones to know the difference between people who are solid and people who just look solid. You're solid." On this particular morning, David was reviewing plans for his next project, a community center that would house small business resources, relationship counseling services, and educational programs about recognizing and avoiding predatory individuals. The project had been funded through a combination of municipal bonds, private donations, and a substantial contribution from David himself. The center would be named the Margaret Morrison Community Resource Center, in honor of David's grandmother, who had taught him that building things meant taking responsibility for their durability and usefulness long after the construction was complete. David's phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Coffee this morning? Jennifer mentioned you're working too hard again." David smiled and typed back, "Sure, but I'm not working too hard. I'm working exactly hard enough." As he drove into town, David reflected on the difference between the life he'd lost and the life he'd gained. The life with Claire had been built around potential for happiness, potential for growth, potential for a partnership that never quite materialized. It had been constructed from hope and compromise, sustained by effort and patience, and ultimately destroyed by the discovery that its foundation had been an illusion. The life he was building now was constructed from different materials: honesty, competence, community, and the hard-earned wisdom that came from surviving betrayal without becoming bitter. It wasn't as dramatic or exciting as the fantasy life Claire had chased, but it was real in a way that performances could never be. David pulled into the parking lot of the diner where he met Tommy most mornings and saw his friend waiting by the entrance with 2 cups of coffee and the comfortable smile of someone who'd watched his friend survive the worst experience of his life and emerge stronger rather than broken. "Morning, Dave. How's the community center project coming?" "On schedule and under budget," David replied, accepting his coffee. "Should be ready for occupancy by next spring." "And how's Jennifer?" "Jennifer's perfect. Not perfect like Claire pretended to be, but actually perfect for me." Tommy nodded approvingly. "That's the difference between finding someone who fits into your life and finding someone who belongs in your life." David looked out at the mountains surrounding Pine Ridge, the town where he'd been born, where he'd built his business, where he'd been betrayed, and where he'd learned to rebuild his life according to his own specifications. He'd spent months demolishing the structures that had been compromised by other people's deceptions. Now he was building something new, not just for himself, but for the community that had supported him through the worst period of his life. It was good work, the kind that would last long after he was gone. And unlike the marriage he'd lost, it was built on a foundation that no one else's choices could undermine. David Morrison had always been a man who built things meant to last. He'd just needed to learn that some foundations were worth preserving and others needed to be cleared away completely before real construction could begin. "Come on," Tommy said, heading toward the diner entrance. "Let's get some breakfast. I want to hear about this community center, and Jennifer mentioned you might need help picking out furniture that doesn't look like a bachelor's attempt at decorating." David laughed and followed his friend inside, ready to start another day of building something worthwhile in a life that finally belonged entirely to him. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.